What if the thing you have been exhausting yourself trying to force, the door you have been throwing your whole body against, was never meant to be opened by you at all? There is a particular kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. You know the kind. It is not the tiredness that a good night's rest fixes. It is deeper than that. It lives in the chest, behind the eyes, in the heavy, dragging quality of mornings that should feel like beginnings but feel instead like the continuation of a weight you have been carrying for longer than you can remember. It is the tiredness of forcing. Of pushing against things that will not move. Of manufacturing outcomes that resist you. Of trying, with every strategy, every plan, every ounce of human effort and ingenuity, to make happen what is simply not happening. And wondering, in the quiet moments you allow yourself, whether you are doing something wrong. Whether you are not trying hard enough. Whether the problem is you. It is not you. Or rather, it is not the lack of you. It is not the absence of your effort or your intelligence or your faith or your worthiness. It is the presence of something that most of us were never properly taught, something that sounds passive when you first hear it but is actually one of the most demanding, most courageous, most spiritually mature things a human being can practice. Surrender. Not the surrender of giving up. Not the surrender of someone who has decided that nothing matters and effort is pointless. But the surrender of someone who has finally, deeply, completely understood that there is a wisdom at work in their life that is greater than their own planning. A guidance that is more precise than their own strategy. A hand on the wheel of their existence that, if they would only stop grabbing for control long enough to feel it, has been steering them all along. This morning message is for the person who is tired of forcing. This is for the person who woke up today with the weight of something unresolved sitting on their chest before they even opened their eyes. The person who has prayed and waited and tried and planned and still, feels like the breakthrough is somewhere just beyond their reach. This is the morning you stop reaching. And start listening. There was a farmer who had farmed the same land for 30 years. He knew every inch of that soil. He knew which areas held water and which drained too quickly. He knew which months were generous and which were hard. He had 30 years of knowledge, 30 years of experience, 30 years of lessons learned through failure and success and everything in between. But one particular season, after a drought that had lasted longer than any he had seen in 3 decades, the farmer decided he knew better than the land. He planted early because he was anxious for the harvest. He planted in sections of the field that his experience told him were wrong for the seed, because he needed the yield and the right sections weren't ready yet. He forced the ground to receive what it was not yet prepared to hold. He lost everything that season. Not because he was foolish. He was one of the most experienced farmers in his region. But because he had stopped listening to the land, to the natural intelligence of timing, of preparation, of readiness, and had started imposing his own desperate timetable onto a process that operates according to laws far older and far wiser than human anxiety. Now carry that image with you. Because that farmer is every one of us who has ever looked at the field of our own life, our career, our relationships, our calling, our healing, our becoming, and decided that because the harvest was taking too long, we needed to force it. We plant in the wrong season because we are afraid the right season will never come. We push open doors that are closed because we cannot bear to stand in the hallway. We manufacture momentum because the stillness feels like failure. And in doing so, we lose the very thing we were trying to secure. Because we removed it from the hands of the one who knew exactly when it was ready to be given. Let God guide you. This sentence, so simple, so familiar, so regularly spoken in churches and devotionals and morning affirmations, carries within it a depth that most of us have never fully excavated. Because we say it. We believe it, in principle. We nod at it on Sunday mornings and write it in our journals and post it on our walls. But then Monday comes. And the situation is still unresolved. And the relationship is still complicated. And the opportunity has still not materialized. And the diagnosis is still the same. And the waiting is still waiting. And without fully realizing it, we take the wheel back. Not dramatically. Not with a conscious decision to stop trusting God. Just quietly, incrementally, in the thousand small ways that anxiety expresses itself as action. We make the call we weren't supposed to make yet because the silence was unbearable. We forced the conversation before its time because the uncertainty felt like abandonment. We move in a direction we weren't clear about because standing still felt like doing nothing. And then we wonder why the result feels hollow. Why the door we pushed open leads to a room that doesn't feel right. Why the thing we made happen doesn't carry the peace that things which are supposed to happen always carry within them. Here is a truth that has the power to reorganize everything, if you will let it land completely. Forced fruit is not ripe fruit. You can pull an orange from the tree before its time. It will look like an orange. It will have the shape and the color and the approximate substance of an orange. But when you taste it, when you actually bite into the life of what you forced into existence before it was ready, it will be bitter. Disappointing. A pale, acidic version of what it would have been if you had simply waited. God's timing is not God's indifference. God's silence is not God's absence. God's closed door is not God's rejection. It is preparation. It is protection. It is the invisible, patient, extraordinarily precise work of a guidance system that can see what you cannot see from where you are standing, the full landscape of your life, the terrain ahead, the places where the path you are desperate to take leads somewhere that would cost you more than the waiting ever could. There is a woman I want you to think about. Her name was Ruth. And if you know the story of Ruth, truly know it, not just the outline but the texture of what she lived, then you know that her life is one of the most breathtaking illustrations of divine guidance ever recorded. Ruth was a widow. A foreigner. A woman with no social standing, no financial security, no roadmap for how her life was going to work. By every human measure, her situation was impossible. The logical, strategic, self-preserving move would have been to return to her own people, her own land, her own culture, to start over in familiar territory with familiar resources. Instead, she followed a quiet, internal conviction to stay with Naomi. To go to a foreign land. To glean in a field she had never seen before, belonging to a man she had never met. She didn't force anything. She showed up. She worked. She remained faithful in the small, daily, unglamorous acts of obedience that were in front of her. And she trusted, without a visible roadmap, without a guaranteed outcome, without any human evidence that this was going to work, that the steps she was being led to take were being ordered by something greater than her own planning. And Boaz found her. Not because she engineered it. Not because she strategized and maneuvered and positioned herself for his attention. But because she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing, in exactly the season that the guidance had placed her in. And what came to her in that field, because she stopped forcing and started following, was not just provision. It was a destiny she could not have imagined from where she started. Your Boaz is in the field. Your breakthrough is in the field. Your healing, your restoration, your answered prayer, it is in the field. But you cannot find it by refusing to go where you are being led. And you cannot find it by forcing your way into a different field because this one doesn't look like what you expected. Show up. Work. Trust. And let the guide who can see the whole field bring to you what your striving cannot manufacture. Every morning is a decision point. Before the phone. Before the news. Before the noise of the day arrives with its demands and its urgencies and its relentless pressure to react and respond and produce and perform, there is a moment. Brief, quiet, easily missed if you are not paying attention. A moment of access. A moment in which the noise has not yet won, and the deepest part of you, the part that is connected to something larger than your circumstances, is still close enough to the surface to be heard. This is the morning moment that everything depends on. Not because of what you do in it, not because you say the right words or perform the right ritual or check the right spiritual boxes. But because of what you choose in it. Do you choose, in that first quiet moment of the day, to immediately fill the silence with input, with the news, the social media, the to-do list, the anxiety about the unresolved thing, and in doing so, close the very channel through which guidance arrives? Or do you choose something different? Do you choose to remain in the quiet long enough to hear? Because God speaks. This is not a metaphor. This is not poetic language dressed up as theology. God speaks, in the stillness, in the impression, in the sudden clarity that arrives like light through a window you forgot was there. In the peace that settles over a decision you have been agonizing about, not because the circumstances changed but because the guidance came. In the gentle, persistent, unmistakable redirection away from something that looked right but wasn't, towards something that looked uncertain but carries within it the particular quality of rightness that only comes from above. But God speaks in the frequency of stillness. And if you never get still, if every morning begins with noise and ends with more noise and the quiet is something you associate with discomfort rather than access, you will miss it. Not because it wasn't sent, but because you were never tuned to receive it. Protect your morning. Not as a lifestyle choice. As a spiritual discipline. Give the first moments of your day to listening before you give them to responding. Sit in the quiet and say, not as a performance, but as a genuine, open, surrendered act of trust, guide me today. Not my plan. Yours. Not my timing. Yours. Not my understanding. Yours. And then, and this is the part that requires the most courage, mean it. There is something that happens in the spirit of a person who genuinely, completely, without reservation surrenders their day to divine guidance. A settling. Not the settling of someone who has given up. The settling of someone who has finally put down a weight they were never designed to carry. The settling of someone who has remembered, in the marrow, not just the mind, that the outcome of their life is not dependent on the perfection of their strategy. It is held by hands that do not tire, by wisdom that does not err, by a love that is not contingent on performance or productivity or the successful forcing of desired outcomes. When you let God guide you, truly let, not just say, the striving changes quality. It becomes something different. It is still effort. It is still showing up, still working, still engaging fully with the life in front of you. But it is effort without desperation. Action without grasping. Movement without the frantic, white-knuckled quality of someone who believes that if they let go for even a moment, everything will fall apart. Because they know, in the settled, quiet, morning-fed place of genuine surrender, that it won't. That it is held. That it has always been held. And that the one who holds it is infinitely more capable of bringing it to its right conclusion than any amount of forcing ever could be. This morning, whatever you are carrying, I want to invite you to set it down. Not permanently. Not passively. Not in the resignation of someone who has stopped believing. But in the active, courageous, deeply faithful act of saying, I trust you more than I trust my plan. I trust your timing more than I trust my urgency. I trust your guidance more than I trust my understanding. Lead me today. And I will follow. That is the prayer that changes mornings. And mornings, changed consistently, one quiet, surrendered, listening morning at a time, change lives. There is a kind of faith that looks like foolishness from the outside. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not perform for approval or demand to be understood. It does not come with a detailed explanation of why it is doing what it is doing or a guarantee of how the story ends. It simply trusts. In the face of uncertainty, it trusts. In the face of delay, it trusts. In the face of the gap between what was promised and what is currently visible, that yawning, uncomfortable, faith-testing gap that every person who has ever believed in something greater than themselves has had to stand in, it trusts. Not blindly. Not naively. Not with the shallow optimism of someone who has never been tested. But with the deep, weathered, costly trust of someone who has been in the dark long enough to know that the dark is not the end of the story. That morning always comes. That the guidance that felt absent was never absent, it was working in the invisible places, arranging what eyes could not yet see, preparing what hands could not yet hold. This is part 2. This is where we talk about what it actually means, in the texture of real, daily, complicated human life, to let God guide you. Not as a concept. As a practice. There is a passage in the book of Proverbs that has quietly dismantled the anxiety of more people than perhaps any other single sentence in Scripture. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight. Read it slowly. Because there is more in it than a first reading reveals. Trust with all your heart, not part of it. Not the portion that is left over after worry has taken its share. Not the trust that is conditional on circumstances cooperating. All of it. The full, undivided, unreserved weight of your confidence, placed not in the plan you have constructed but in the one who holds the blueprint. Lean not on your own understanding, and this is where it gets genuinely demanding. Because your understanding is not nothing. You are intelligent. You are experienced. You have learned things, observed things, developed genuine wisdom through the living of your life. And God does not ask you to abandon that. But He asks you to hold it loosely. To acknowledge that what you can see from where you are standing is a fraction, a single frame, of a story that is being told across dimensions you cannot access. And that the fraction, however brilliant your analysis of it, is not the whole. In all your ways acknowledge Him, every decision. Every morning. Every crossroads. Every seemingly small choice that feels too minor to bring to prayer but is, in reality, exactly the kind of ordinary moment through which divine guidance most frequently moves. And He will make your paths straight, not smooth. Notice the promise is not that the path will be without difficulty or confusion or the kind of terrain that requires everything you have. The promise is that it will be straight. That it will lead somewhere. That it is going in the right direction even when, from inside the journey, it feels like it is going nowhere. This verse is not poetry. It is a navigation system. And every morning that you choose it over your own anxious calculation, you are choosing the most reliable guidance available to any human being on earth. A man named Joseph knew something about paths that did not look straight. Sold by his brothers. Enslaved in a foreign country. Falsely accused. Imprisoned. Forgotten by the very person he helped, left in a cell while the days turned into years and the promise he had carried since adolescence seemed to grow more impossible with every sunrise. If you had looked at Joseph's life from the outside, at any single point along that journey, it would have appeared to be a story of abandonment. Of unanswered prayer. Of a man whose faith was not producing the outcomes that faith is supposed to produce. But God was guiding. In every betrayal, guiding. In every unjust imprisonment, guiding. In every year of waiting that felt like waste, guiding. Arranging, positioning, preparing both the man and the moment with a precision that no human strategy could have replicated. And when the moment came, when Joseph stood before Pharaoh and the fullness of what God had been building in the invisible years was finally revealed, Joseph himself said something that should arrest every person who is currently in a season that doesn't make sense. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Not, God allowed it despite intending good. God intended it for good. The very thing that looked like the destruction of the promise was the construction of the destiny. This is what divine guidance looks like from the inside of the journey. It does not always feel like guidance. It often feels like delay, like loss, like the opposite of what you prayed for. It often looks, to human eyes operating on human timelines, like nothing is happening. But something is always happening. In the hidden places of your life, in the character being formed through the waiting, in the wisdom being built through the difficulty, in the connections being arranged and the doors being positioned and the season being prepared that will make the arrival of what you have been believing for make sense in a way that forcing it early never could have, something is always happening. Your Joseph season is not wasted. It is the workshop where the person who can carry the destiny is being built. Trust the workshop. One of the most misunderstood aspects of letting God guide you is the question of action. Because surrender, to many people, sounds like stillness. It sounds like passivity. It sounds like sitting in a room with your hands folded, waiting for something to fall from the ceiling while the world moves forward without you. That is not surrender. That is avoidance wearing spiritual clothing. Genuine surrender, the kind that partners with divine guidance rather than using it as an excuse for inaction, is deeply, actively engaged with the life in front of it. It shows up. It works. It serves. It takes the next right step, the one that is clearly in front of it, with full commitment and full effort and full excellence. It does not wait for the entire staircase to be visible before it steps onto the first stair. It simply refuses to manufacture stairs that were never there. There is a difference, and it is crucial, between the action that flows from guidance and the action that flows from anxiety. Action that flows from guidance has a particular quality to it. It feels like obedience rather than striving. It carries a sense of rightness even when it is difficult. It moves in a direction that, somewhere beneath the noise of circumstance, feels aligned, even when it cannot fully explain why. It produces, even in its hardest moments, a peace that is difficult to articulate but impossible to mistake. Action that flows from anxiety has a different quality entirely. It is urgent in a way that does not come from clarity. It pushes against resistance rather than moving through open space. It produces results that feel hollow even when they look successful. And it exhausts, deeply, cumulatively, in that particular way that forcing exhausts, because it is running on human fuel rather than divine. Every morning, before the day begins, ask yourself: am I about to act from guidance or from anxiety? Am I moving because I have a genuine sense of leading, or because the silence has become uncomfortable and I need to feel like I am doing something? Am I stepping through an open door, or throwing myself against a closed one because I cannot accept that it is closed for a reason? This question, asked honestly and regularly, will save you years. It will protect you from the bitter fruit of forced seasons. And it will keep your actions aligned with the current of divine guidance rather than constantly fighting against it. Let me tell you about a woman named Hannah. Hannah wanted a child with the kind of wanting that went beyond preference or desire. It was the deepest longing of her soul. And year after year, that longing went unanswered. While others around her received what she had been praying for, Hannah waited. And grieved. And prayed again. And waited more. There is a moment in Hannah's story that I find almost unbearably human. She goes to the temple and she prays with such raw, unguarded, total honesty that the priest watching her assumes she is drunk. Because she is not performing prayer. She is not saying the right words in the right order for the right audience. She is pouring out, completely, without dignity, without restraint, the full, unfiltered contents of her broken heart before God. And what strikes me about Hannah is not just that her prayer was answered. It is the quality of her surrender in the asking. She did not demand. She did not manipulate. She did not give God a deadline or an ultimatum or a carefully constructed argument for why he was obligated to respond in her preferred time frame. She wept. She asked. She made a vow. And then she got up, and the scripture says that her face was no longer downcast. Before anything changed. Before the answer came. Before there was a single piece of visible evidence that anything was different. Her face changed. Because something inside her shifted, from the desperate, white-knuckled grip of someone trying to force an outcome, to the open, surrendered, resting posture of someone who has placed what they love most into hands more capable than their own. And in that surrender, God moved. He always moves in surrender. Not because surrender earns the answer. But because surrender creates the interior space in which the answer can be received. Because the same hands that are clenched in desperate forcing cannot be open to receive. And what God has for you, the guidance, the provision, the breakthrough, the appointed thing that has your name on it, requires open hands. Release what you have been gripping. Open your hands. And trust that what comes into them from above will be infinitely better than anything you could have forced into them from your own effort. I want to talk about the mornings. Specifically, I want to talk about what happens when you protect them. When you guard the first portion of your day as sacred space, not for productivity or planning or even for the consumption of good content, but for the simple, profound, life-altering practice of listening. Because what happens in a person who does this consistently, who gives God the first quiet moments of every day, not as a ritual but as a genuine act of orientation, is a transformation that is difficult to describe to someone who has not experienced it. The anxiety changes. Not because the circumstances change, but because the place from which you face the circumstances changes. You stop facing the day from the fragile, vulnerable platform of your own understanding, and start facing it from the settled, grounded, anchored place of someone who has already, before the first demand of the day arrived, placed themselves in the hands of guidance. The decisions become clearer. Not because you become smarter or more experienced, but because the noise that usually crowds out the still small voice has been given less real estate in your morning. And in the quiet, the guidance that was always available becomes accessible, the impression, the clarity, the peace that settles on one option and not another, the gentle but unmistakable sense of direction that those who listen regularly learn to recognize and trust. The peace becomes different. It becomes, as Paul described it in his letter to the Philippians, a peace that passes understanding. Not a peace that makes sense given the circumstances, because often the circumstances give no grounds for peace at all. But a peace that is independent of circumstances. That does not require them to cooperate before it shows up. That is present in the uncertainty, in the delay, in the unresolved and the unanswered, because it is not sourced in the situation. It is sourced in the relationship. With the one who guides. Protect your mornings. Give them to listening before you give them to anything else. Not because you have to, but because you have tasted, or are about to taste, what it feels like to start a day from that anchored, oriented, guided place. And once you have tasted it, nothing else will satisfy. There is a final image I want to leave with you. Think of a river. A deep, wide, unhurried river moving through a landscape with the kind of quiet authority that comes from knowing exactly where it is going. It does not rush. It does not strain. It does not exhaust itself trying to get around every obstacle by force. It moves around them with the patient, inevitable intelligence of water that understands its own nature. It is fed from a source higher than itself. And because it is connected to that source, because it does not depend on its own reserves alone, it does not run dry. Even in seasons of drought. Even when the rains have stopped and the ground is hard and everything around it looks parched. It keeps moving. Kept alive by the source. You were designed to live like that river. Not running on your own reserves. Not forcing your way through obstacles by sheer human effort. Not exhausting yourself in the frantic, grinding, bitter-fruited work of making happen what was never meant to be made to happen. But connected. To the source that is higher than yourself. Fed from above. Moving with the unhurried, authoritative, peace-filled certainty of someone who knows that they are guided, and that the guide has never, not once, not for a single moment of the journey, lost sight of where they are going. This morning, you do not have to have it all figured out. You do not have to know how the next chapter resolves. You do not have to force the door or manufacture the momentum or perform the faith that you are struggling to feel. You just have to listen. Get still. Get quiet. Get honest. And say, from the deepest, most surrendered, most genuinely trusting place inside you. Lead me today, Lord. I will not force anything. I will not lean on my own understanding. I will acknowledge you in this day, in every decision, every crossroads, every moment where anxiety tells me to grab the wheel. And I will trust, truly trust, that you are making my path straight. Even when I cannot see it yet. Even when it does not look the way I expected. Even when the waiting is hard and the silence feels long. I trust you. Lead me. That prayer, simple, surrendered, morning-fed, is the beginning of a guided life. And a guided life is the most extraordinary life available to any human being on earth. Not because it is free of difficulty. but because it is never navigated alone. This community. The Stoic Path. Every week, we come here and we have the conversations that matter. The deep ones. The honest ones. The ones that meet you where you actually are, not where you are performing to be, and speak to the real, complicated, beautifully human journey of becoming who you were created to be. We talk about faith and philosophy and the daily, unglamorous, profoundly important work of living with intention and wisdom and the kind of peace that does not depend on perfect circumstances. If that is what you are hungry for, and something tells me it is, subscribe to the Stoic Path right now. Hit that button. Turn on your notifications. Share this message with someone who woke up this morning trying to force something that needs to be surrendered. Someone who is exhausted from striving. Someone who needs to hear, in the clearest, most honest, most loving terms possible, that they are allowed to let go. Send it to them. Because some messages find us at exactly the right moment. And this one, for someone in your life, might be that moment. This is the Stoic Path. And you, guided, held, connected to a source higher than your circumstances, are exactly where you need to be. Go into your day. Not forcing.